The House worked for about 10 hours today considering the governor's 2 reform packages and other legislation. Representative Lee Pegues handled the reform strengthening the Alabama Commission on Higher Education. He had no problem winning approval of a proposed law outlining Commission's powers, a bill dependent on the survival of another measure giving the Commission constitutional power. It was here that Representative Pegues ran into strong opposition.
But it simply is not fair, in my judgment, to come along and change 2 universities that are already set up by the Constitution. They're operating on it, and they're operating beautifully.
But Pegues argued the constitutional amendment was necessary to control courses at Alabama and Auburn. The first vote fell short. Governor James' legislative liaison worked hard trying to change the votes, and his work paid off. The second vote picked up 15 badly needed votes to pass the proposed amendment. Late this afternoon, the Supreme Court issued a requested opinion supporting Pegues' position that the amendment would be needed to allow the Commission to control courses at Alabama and Auburn, the only 2 universities chartered under the Constitution. The governor's crime bill package moved quickly, winning overwhelming vote after overwhelming vote. Only 1 bill died. It would have allowed a criminal defendant to be charged with perjury if he lied in his criminal trial. House Speaker Joe McCorkadale won approval of his bill requiring Alabama workers to be hired on public works projects. He took the opportunity to accuse Lieutenant Governor George McMillan of blocking the bill in the past.
And since the presiding officer is not there apparently this week, maybe we can get it passed.
And Representative Pegues was back at the microphone, winning approval of a bill to raise the legal drinking age to 21. And Representative Dwayne Lewis won approval of his bill mandating stiff penalties for drunk driving convictions. All of the bills now move on to the Senate, and as Dennis Latham reports, their chances of passage in the Senate could be measured by today's Senate action.
In the upper chamber, crime bills were given priority on a special order calendar. The senators went to work passing many of the proposed crime bills with little or no debate. The first major snag came as discussion began on a bill increasing penalties for driving under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances. Senator Bill Smith of Huntsville was told his bill would make the penalties for first offenders so severe, law enforcement officers would be reluctant to make arrests, and prosecutors wouldn't want to try the cases. The bill finally passed after changes were made to remove the mandatory jail sentence for a first DUI conviction. 6 of 9 bills offered by Attorney General Charles Graddick passed the Senate. Mr. Graddick stood by in the Senate balcony most of the day, urging his legislation on and helping senators answer questions about the bills. The major Senate bills not passed and possibly dead for this session include raising the drinking age from 19 to 21, abolishing the insanity defense, granting city police power to execute search warrants, and a constitutional amendment to strengthen the Alabama Commission on Higher Education. House and Senate committees meet in the morning to discuss bills passed by the other chamber today. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
From the legislature tonight, the governor's 2 reform packages were the center of attention today as the House and Senate debated their contents. Upstairs in our newsroom, Chris Grimshaw and Dennis Latham are just in from the Capitol. Chris says the House gave overwhelming approval to the issues, but Dennis, you say the Senate was a little hesitant.
Yes, Bob, the Senate placed the governor's and the Attorney General's bills on a special order calendar, and the senators went to work quickly approving some of the bills with little or no debate. Some of the bills were carried over for a short time to prepare non-controversial amendments. The first hang-up came when the Senate began debate on a bill to increase penalties for driving under the influence of alcohol. Senator Bill Smith of Huntsville, who sponsored the measure, had some trouble getting his colleagues to go along with a mandatory jail sentence on the first offense. One senator said because the proposed penalties were so severe, law enforcement officers would be reluctant to arrest someone for DUI, and prosecutors wouldn't want to try the cases. Senator Smith substituted his own bill to remove the mandatory jail sentence for a first offense. He admitted to the upper chamber that it was the only way the bill would pass. Other crime bills having trouble in the Senate include one to give city police power to execute a search warrant and another making it easier to get a nighttime search warrant. A bill raising the legal drinking age from 19 to 21 was placed on a back burner, along with a requirement that the State Pardons and Parole Board notify the public when an inmate is to be released. Debate on a proposed constitutional amendment to strengthen the Alabama Commission on Higher Education was also put off. But Chris, I understand that the AIC reform did fare better in the House.
Not only did the AIC reform fare better in the House, but so did the governor's crime reform bill. But first, Representative Lee Pegues had to win approval of his AIC reform bill, a proposed law that outlines the new Commission on Higher Education's powers. But Representative Pegues had a much tougher fight winning approval of the proposed constitutional amendment, giving the Commission authority to control courses at the University of Alabama and Auburn University. Most of Pegues' opposition came from representatives from districts surrounding those two schools' various campuses. It wasn't until late in the day that the Supreme Court ruled that the proposed constitutional amendment would be needed to enforce the Commission's powers on those two constitutionally chartered universities. There was little opposition as 18 of the governor's crime bills were considered. 16 of the bills were overwhelmingly approved with little debate, but 2 bills did create a snag. One bill, approved after a lengthy debate, would allow several criminals in a single crime to be tried together as a group. The second bill, which was the only bill in the crime package to be killed, would have allowed a suspect to be charged with perjury if he lied during his trial. Opponents argue the bill could infringe on double jeopardy. The House also approved 2 of the 9 bills in the Attorney General's crime package, including a bill that repeals insanity as a defense. House Speaker Joe McCorkadale won unanimous approval of his bill that would require Alabama workers to be hired on public works projects. The Speaker accused Lieutenant Governor McMillan of blocking the bill in the past and said perhaps the Lieutenant Governor's absence from the Senate this week would allow the bill to be considered in the Senate. And just several minutes ago, the House approved the bill that would raise the legal drinking age from 19 to 21. The House members and Senate members are expected to work more this evening as they attempt to pass as many bills as they can, since if the attempted effort to stop the session on Friday, to end the session on Friday, that would require that all bills originated in the House be acted on by the House today in order for them to be considered by the Senate, and the same in the reverse order for Senate bills to be considered by the House by Friday.
Okay. Bob? Thanks, Chris. Chris Grimshaw and Dennis Latham live in the newsroom. The 25th anniversary celebration.
That I hope to do and plan to do as a U.S. Congressman is to pull together a task force of people. We have got to have some plans and objectives. We've got to know where we're going. Too often in government, we seem to simply meander along from one year to the next without some clearly defined goals and some clearly defined objectives. For example, here in this district, we have tremendous lignite deposits. But are we going to explore those deposits? What will be the environmental impact if we do explore them? How are we going to haul that coal in and out? What are the transportation needs? Are we going to try to get more high technology industry into this area? If we are, what will be their educational requirements for those people? How will we keep the measurement of economic growth or whatever in the Sun Belt states, the 14 Sun
The governor's AIC reform package went to the Senate Education Committee this morning. Governor Fob James even showed up to urge a favorable report for the legislation. Representatives of the University of Alabama and Auburn University opposed it. The 2 bills did come out of committee. A substantial number of crime bills passed yesterday by the House were also reported out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. When the Senate convened later, committee reports on these and other bills were called for. The committee clerks weren't ready to report, so the Senate went on to other business. Senators passed 4 bills on the calendar before an adjournment motion was made. On a voice vote, the upper chamber decided to quit until in the morning. The question is, what happened to the bills to be reported out of committee? The Constitution says these bills must be reported to the Senate while in session on the day before they are to be debated and voted on by the entire body.
According to what I can find out, the Senate did adjourn, but the bills have been received. As whether they will go on record as being received, I do not know. At this time, there's some question as to whether there has been second readings of the crime package and the AIC bills and the local legislation or not.
Senator White says if the bills were not reported, then the special session will have to continue next week if the Senate is to legally act on the governor's reform package. Another senator told us if the bills are considered reported today, then he believes the Senate acted illegally. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News in the Senate.
Reaction in the form of this resolution is in no wise predicated upon any self-short sight or a state that read in part some future
We are operating this project under a contract funded by the federal government.
The details of the construction of the photovoltaic, have a cloud drift by it, and then see the meters over here show.
I thought you would Bob out. This is just product. The amount of you see him around fixing the lights, doing other stuff here. We're building a new tower. Figure this new work is better too. Yeah.
Hopper's approval of plans for a new county jail are vital to the project. Without it, the county could build the $23 million complex, but be barred from putting any inmates inside. Hopper's concern is with two proposed dormitories that would house 16 inmates. Hopper says the Montgomery plan conflicts with guidelines for county jails drawn up by the Alabama Sheriff's Association. The guidelines set standards for dormitories in existing jails, but say all cells in new facilities should not house more than 4 inmates. Executive Director of the Alabama Sheriff's Association, Bobby Timmons, says leaving out the provisions dealing with dormitories and guidelines for new facilities was an oversight. And from what he's seen of the plans for the Montgomery County Jail, he would approve the project. After Commissioner Hopper failed to approve the plans, the commission went to federal court to get Judge Varner's opinion on the plans. Judge Varner put a hold on the hearing and ruled the case should first be submitted to Governor James. Under Alabama law, the governor has final say on plans for jail facilities and could overrule Hopper's decision. Attorney Richard Shinbaum, who represents the inmates at the county jail, says he does not object to the proposed plans for the jail, but he's concerned about what Hopper's objection means, unless it's cleared up.
And until Commissioner Hopper approves the plans, or until the governor of Alabama approves the plans, I'm going to have a grave concern, because it would mean that any citizen could come into state court, challenge the construction of a new jail, stop the project, and we'd be 5 or 10 years down the road before we got it. And with today's crime figures, we can't afford that chance.
Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
McPhillips told reporters that he has also named as defendants in the suit State Finance Director Rex Rayner, State Treasurer Annie Laurie Gunter, and State Controller Tom Brazel, asking that they be enjoined from approving payment of the higher salary to Graddick. McPhillips gave Graddick an ultimatum August 2nd to reimburse the state for the raises which McPhillips claims were unconstitutionally awarded or faced the suit. He says Graddick has not responded.
And I gave the Attorney General 1 week's notice by this letter to restore to the state treasury this money or face a taxpayer suit. I gave him 7 days to respond. Today, 10 days later, I haven't even received the courtesy of a reply.
McPhillips, a former assistant attorney general, accused Graddick of using a double standard by prosecuting welfare mothers on petty fraud charges and then accepting the pay raises for himself.
When Graddick was sworn in as Attorney General of Alabama in January 1979, he took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Alabama. His reaching into the state treasury amounts to a blatant violation of that oath.
In a news release, Attorney General Charles Graddick says he would have no comment on McPhillips' suit since Governor James has already asked the Alabama Supreme Court for an advisory opinion on the salary matter. Matt Carmack, WSFA TV News.
Alabama, you have the highest unemployment, I think, in the country, very nearly so, if not. Is it the highest, Richard? It's the highest, except for Michigan. But it's true all over the country. I was just in California, 10.5% unemployment. Whether it's in Iowa, where farmers are having their worst year since the Depression, or in North Carolina, where the furniture and the textile industry and the farm business is going right down into recession and depression, or my own Iron Range in Minnesota, where most everybody is unemployed.
Montgomery Fire Department is constantly attempting to upgrade our fire safety program in Montgomery. Freddie has been created in the Montgomery Fire Department by Montgomery firefighters for the sole purpose of educating the public on fire safety and life safety. Freddie will be used extensively throughout the schools of Montgomery County. Also, it will be used in the malls, in the shopping center areas, places like this.
Talk about unemployment and talk about interest rates and what they feel and how they stand. And so I'm just saying again that I am ready to meet Mr. Camp in a debate and let the people make up their mind as to who has the best. If you load up an area with PhD, the 2nd District of Alabama has tremendous potential. There are tremendous resources here in the 2nd District. But somehow or another, I feel that we're not harnessing these resources and this potential the best way to serve the people. Administration from year to year, and we never seem to have any direction. And there's so many questions out there that need answering. Nobody has a crystal ball, but I think we've got an awful lot of people that could help us try to.
The controversy is over whether bills reported out of committee this morning were actually received and reported while the Senate was in session. The bills include the governor's reforms of the Alabama Commission on Higher Education reported out of the Senate Education Committee and the various crime bills reported out of the Judiciary Committee. The Constitution says bills must be reported out of committee to the full Senate one day before they can be debated and voted on. The committee reports were skipped over because they weren't ready. No other mention was made of accepting the reports before the Senate adjourned at 5 minutes past noon. If the bills weren't properly accepted, the Senate can't debate them tomorrow as planned. State Senator Dewey White tried to find out what happened and told me after talking to several Senate officials, including the Secretary of the Senate, he still didn't know. He said he'd be sure to bring the matter up tomorrow. Another issue Senator White will discuss is what happened to the House bill to raise the drinking age to 21. That bill was assigned to the Senate Commerce, Transportation, and Utility Committee instead of the Judiciary Committee. The Commerce, Transportation, and Utility Committee didn't meet today and didn't report, and the Senate can't consider it tomorrow. The bill's sponsor, Representative Lee Pegues, says the committee switch is an attempt to kill the bill. The Commerce, Transportation, and Utility Committee has scheduled a meeting in the morning before the Senate convenes. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News in the Senate.
Dr. Rayner didn't paint as bleak a picture today, saying this year could end with a small $10 million surplus, and next year could break even. Strongly contrasting Dr. Rayner's statement was former state budget officer Jake Jordan.
I understand that the state is faced with some pretty bad problems in the state general fund. That is the understatement of the year. The understatement of the year.
Mr. Jordan says this year could end with just more than $1 million shortage, and next year could see a whopping $34 million deficit. Mr. Jordan spread the blame for the problem, accusing this year's problems on the legislature overspending and the administration releasing conditional money before paying all absolute bills. Dr. Rayner defended the conditional releases, saying they were necessary to help mental health in prisons in their federal court battles. Dr. Rayner also said there were more conditionals the administration felt were essential for this year, but he also said the small surplus he projected for this year was based on the administration not releasing any more of those conditional dollars. Both Dr. Rayner and Jordan tried to outdo each other in criticizing the practice of earmarking and the legislature's refusal to end the practice. Dr. Rayner says earmarked funds may have as much as $80 million in surplus at the end of this year, not a dollar of which can be used to solve the problem. Jordan said he'd like to see unearmarking, but he says he still has knots on his head from education forces from the last time he tried to unearmark funds in 1945. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The estimates that
particularly those interested in electrical engineering. We are operating this project under a contract funded by the federal government, in which we competed with a number of recognition to the people in our School of Sciences. Dr. Joe Hill, I believe, is here. He is dean of that school.
We think we were enormously cost competitive. We had a low overhead rate compared to many concerns like Westinghouse, who you would assume would have quite a large overhead rate. And so I think the combination of the technical capability that we had and our very, very competitive cost posture is what won the day for us.
Well, AUM's primary interest was getting involved in this new technology and being a part of it. We anticipate bidding or, competing for other photovoltaic projects like this, since we've been fortunate enough to get into it and be a part of the developing technology.
They have become very decent.
When you have no sun to provide battery backup, as you walk around this morning and look at these trailers, you'll see a compartment down inside the trailers. Those compartments are carrying batteries.
The legislators were first given a gloomy forecast by former budget officer Jake Jordan. Mr. Jordan says his review of the fund shows it has more than just a problem.
That is the understatement of the year. The understatement of the year.
He believes the fund will fall $1 million short this year and a whopping $34 million short next year, a statement Finance Director Rex Rayner disagrees with.
At this point, we do not foresee the extent of the deficit that Mr. Jordan sees.
In fact, Dr. Rayner says there is a way to leave a small surplus this year and prevent any deficit next year. A solution, he says, is based on not releasing any conditional funds for mental health, Medicaid, prisons, and the federal government. Conditionals, he says, the administration feels must be met. Jordan says the release of some of those conditionals so far this year is the culprit in the current crisis, blame he put on the legislature for offering them and the governor for approving them. Both Dr. Rayner and Mr. Jordan agreed unearmarking taxes would solve the problem. But Mr. Jordan may have summed that up as an unpopular solution when he said he still has knots on his head from his attempt to unearmark education funds 37 years ago. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
11.2 million.
AUM had the best proposal for what the Environmental Protection Agency needed, a reliable source of electricity to operate their instruments in remote locations where there's no commercial power and where gas or diesel generator exhaust would interfere with their air and water quality measurements. AUM built 4 trailer-mounted portable solar units that are made up of several hundred photosensitive silicon cells that produce electricity. There are also a number of nickel-cadmium batteries used to store power for cloudy days or nights. But Alan Gunn, AUM's photovoltaic expert, says at this time it's not economically feasible to put this type of system into home use.
Assuming a home of, say, 1,500 square feet, which might be typical in Montgomery, Alabama, assuming an energy-efficient home, a new design, one that has the proper insulation, etc., you would need about $80,000 to put a photovoltaic system on that home for the initial cost.
The first of these solar-powered units is currently running an EPA water sampling station at the Farley Nuclear Power Plant near Dothan. I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News, reporting from the AUM campus.
The Padres kept the Braves on the skids, handing the Braves their 10th straight loss. The Braves took a 1-0 lead early in the game, Glenn Hubbard getting on with a single and Jerry Royster bringing him home with a double. 1-0 Braves in the second inning. Sloppy defense led to the Padres tying the game in the third. Claudell Washington has the ball get by him in right field. A single and a 2-base error puts Perkins to third. Bob Walken corks a wild pitch, and the Padres have the game tied. It was strike 3 with 2 outs. Gwynn making it safely to first. Down 2-1 in the 5th inning. Brett Butler singles to get on base, and Dale Murphy got his 80th RBI with a sacrifice fly to deep right. The Padres regained the lead in the bottom of the 5th on Tony Gwynn's ground rule double. 3-2 Padres. But they got more insurance in the 6th inning. The Padres came up with 5 runs. The big hit, Terry Kennedy's 2-run homer. San Diego 8, Atlanta 2. Art Ekman from Atlanta for NBC News.
Former Governor George Wallace attempted to convince blacks at the 25th annual SCLC convention that he's buried his racist ways. He now needs their support in the governor's race.
Whether or not you agree with me in everything that I used to do and agree to, I know that you do not. I have too seen the mistakes that all of us made in years past, but I've been your governor for a long time. And I tell you that the leaders who are sitting back of me will tell you privately, I don't know about the public now, I don't ask them to, but they can tell you that George Wallace's office was always open to anyone, regardless of race or color.
But SCLC officials say they have problems with the George Wallace they used to know.
Completely willing to accept as a fellow human being and as a brother in Christ, George Wallace, but I still have problems with Wallaceism. And I think I have to distinguish between the two when it comes to electing governors.
Although many SCLC supporters question the sincerity of George Wallace, he urged them to forget his past and to join forces with him so that all of the people of Alabama can move forward. Cynthia Pryor, Channel 6 News Update.
I don't care whether we're talking about education problems, problems with building highways and bridges where they're needed, problems with prisons, with the courts, with crime, with mental health. Whatever problems and issues they are in this state are tied to the total failure of the legislative system to operate. And until we change that, we're not going to be able to address these problems that we're hitting head on. It's an issue that I'm trying to tell properly, and we want to get it to working. And the only other thing that I'll add,
At Head Elementary School in Montgomery, 61 children applied for 20 openings in the school's one kindergarten class. At Dozier Elementary School, things were a little better. 67 children applied for 40 openings.
We've just had our kindergarten lottery, and her child's name was drawn. She will be in our kindergarten this year.
The lottery system started when Alabama decided to move toward the kindergarten program, make it a part of public schools in Alabama.
State education specialist Jacqueline Autry says the state started building a kindergarten program in 1977 with 200 classes and plans to add 200 a year until there was a fully funded statewide program. But in 1980, the program stalled in an economic crunch.
There's the projected need right now of about $40 million more to fully fund the program, and that's a lot of money for Alabama to suddenly come up with.
There are hopes the program will start growing again soon under growing public pressure, but it won't happen this year.
Is Miss Jackson in? May I speak with her, please?
Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. The lottery started in 1977. It's the yearly determination of who will and who won't go to the public kindergartens in Alabama.
We've just had our kindergarten lottery, and your child's name was drawn.
It's a system accepted by some and criticized by others.
I really think the parents expect the lottery now. We've done this for several years, and we get a lot of anxiety. We have parents who really want their children in this public school kindergarten, and oftentimes they're disappointed.
Even the parents of children who are chosen don't necessarily think the system's good. Dolores Wallach's daughter Rachel will be going to kindergarten this fall.
But I feel very sorry for the unfortunate 60 who feel like losers. That's a terrible way to start your school life, to feel like a loser. It's like a contest for a prize, and you're a loser, and they really do feel like losers. My daughter this morning was practically in tears because she was afraid she wouldn't be one of the chosen.
The kindergarten program in the state stalled in 1980, unable to grow because of economic troubles. Now state officials say public pressure to expand the program is growing. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
But I think people realize that there is a great need for more kindergartens, and kindergartens set up so that we can service all the children that apply. But until our financial situation improves, I don't think we'll be able to do much about it.
Will be responsible for delivering the packets of material to those who are...
Some examples. There are others that go back to the points made in the questionnaire about diet, about fat, about the carton of cigarettes, and the banning of cigarette advertisement on national television.
Very important that you're learning more about the relationships. At the beginning of this study, we will be able to keep in touch with them and find out how, as just mentioned, would affect all types of people. We also want people who are exposed to sunlight, and because we do feel that may have some real bearing on the incidence.
Secretary of State Don Siegelman is asking Governor James to cooperate and notify newspapers of the proper numbers of the proposed amendments that are to appear on the ballot in September. Already ads are running in state newspapers listing the amendments, but these ads show 4 amendments with, in most cases, the budget isolation amendment as the first. But Siegelman says since the legislature didn't ask that the isolation amendment be placed on the ballot, he couldn't certify it. He says if the amendment remains on the ballot, he won't certify the amendment election.
If there are, in fact, different ballots being used in different counties with different numbers, then I think that, coupled with confusion on the part of the voters and the question of adequate notice being given through the governor's proclamation to voters, raises several legal questions about the validity of the amendment process.
Siegelman says he's delighted that the court found in his favor, but he admits that the court didn't specifically address his sole authority to certify the ballot. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Election.
All these bills, when the Senate bills are the ones that are the viable bills.
Mr. President. Senator Kirkland.
I was just trying to figure out, as I saw it, I mean, I wasn't in the chamber, we adjourned prior to accepting these bills.
But all the time I wanted to teach and I wanted to write. And I said, if you're going to do these things, you have to do it and find a place to do it. Knoxville is where I went to school. I have a lot of friends there. And I said, I think I'll just go back to Knoxville and live there and try to work out of there, which is what I'm doing.
How is academia?
Well, it's fine. It's fine. It's hard work. Grading papers and things like that, I made a lot of rookie mistakes. I gave an assignment to the class to critique the Super Bowl telecast. I laid out all the elements available to the producer and then had them critique it. And the head of the department said to me, did you put a limit on that? And I said, no. And he said, that's a rookie mistake. Because he said, you'll find there are students who can't express themselves in less than 3,000 words, and you'll go blind trying to grade the papers. Well, he was right. I was there for weeks trying to grade the papers.
Form of treatment for patients with acute myocardial infarction, or, as it is commonly known, heart attacks. The problem
What has been the treatment in the past before this particular type of treatment that you're proposing?
Well, the conventional treatment for acute myocardial infarction or heart attack victims is to place them in the setting of a coronary care unit. That is simply to put them at bed, to sedate them so that they are relaxed and as comfortable as possible, to try to treat their pain with morphine and other types of very strong pain medications, and to monitor their heart rhythm with little electrodes on the chest so that any electrical instability of the heart can be immediately treated with drugs or by other means.
One of the quarterbacks I've been trying to trade for over the years is Greg Landry. When I was with the Redskins, I tried to make a trade for him when he was with the Detroit Lions. We wanted a quarterback who could start and win and come off of the bench and win.
If you know George Allen, then the signing of a 14-year veteran should not be surprising. The Blitz's latest major player spent 11 seasons with the Detroit Lions. He was traded to the Baltimore Colts in 1979, and the 35-year-old Landry was beginning his 15th NFL season when he was waived by the Colts last month. The philosophy of this senior quarterback?
I think as you get older, and if you do develop into the kind of quarterback that the people want you to develop into, the people in pro football, I think what you learn to do is to use those 10 players that are playing around you. And I think what happens, you get a better performance from them. I know that down in Baltimore the last few years, whenever I played, there was a positive attitude from all the players because they said, gee, you know, Greg's going to get me the ball.
The USFL's inaugural season opens March 1983.
Cases to be by, and I think it's good to be called a fringe benefit package. It's just very extravagant. In spite of the fact that, in light of our reclassification of a year ago, relative to the private sector, county, city governments, and other southern states, the state of Alabama would have a minimum of $75 million a year. Too high. For those 3 reasons. Sure. Will you try unearmarking or retirement again? It's basically got a so-called financial crisis. You got to tell them you got a financial crisis. They pass that legislation and how often
used in their advertising. The possibility of tabulation and canvassing error occurs due to there may be some serious. While it is gratifying to have the court sustain our certification, it is more important that Alabama citizens, probate judges, and other election officials are relieved of the confusion which might have resulted had the court not acted expeditiously.
What is the governor now? And this is a good example of that. But other than that, as best I can tell, it hadn't had any other effect. I was in a tent that was 6 feet square, erected inside of an apartment building. And I was not blindfolded, but I was confined to the inside of the tent. I was chained by my right arm to one end of a bunk, by my left leg to the other end of the bunk. And, excuse me, and I was required to wear earphones through which cassette music, pre-recorded music was played.
Young Tim Norris is out in front of the Sammy Davis Greater Hartford Open. I asked Tim how he liked being the leader at the midway point.
Yeah, well, it's a new feeling, but I'd rather be a couple ahead than a couple behind, you know. Doesn't take a college graduate to figure that one out.
Have you been playing that well all year?
Oh, this year has been a disaster, really. I missed the first 14 tournaments of the year with a sprained hand. I've made about $3,000 this year, which is, you know, I think I spent my last $20 on this shirt right here, you know. It's really been tough, but, you know, if you can get through the bad times and then you get weeks like this, you jump on it.
Among those chasing Tim is PGA champion Raymond Floyd, who continues his hot streak.
Well, Charlie, I hit an 8-iron. I was 140 yards into the hole, and I've been hitting the ball awfully well all week, both rounds, and when that one bounced, I really thought it might go in the hole.
Is it difficult coming off of your PGA championship to continue playing so well?
I think not. The reason is I left there with a lot of confidence. I played very, very well, and it's carried over here.
And here are the leaders at the halfway point.
With the New Orleans Saints leading 13-0, the Oilers scored on this 12-yard pass from Gifford Nielsen to tight end Tim Wilson, 13-7. Houston added a pair of 37-yard field goals by first-year kicker Florian Kemp, and with 5 minutes left in the third quarter, the Oilers had tied the score at 13-all. Now watch the right side of your screen. Number 57, John Corker, will catch quarterback Bobby Scott in the end zone for a safety at a 15-13 Oiler lead. But the Saints came right back with Hokie Gaijan going 14 yards, and with 5 minutes to play in the game, the New Orleans Saints led 20-15. The Oilers were not finished, though. They drove to the Saints' 20, and quarterback Giff Nielsen pitched a perfect strike to tight end Dave Casper for the touchdown. Final score, Houston 22, New Orleans 20.
Should you meet Ray Scott for the first time and not know who he is, you could easily come to the wrong conclusion. Ray Scott comes across as your typical good old boy, sort of a polished redneck. His standard attire is faded jeans, boots, and a Caterpillar ball cap. You'd figure he'd drive a '74 Chevy pickup with one of those America Love It or Leave It bumper stickers. But don't let that Ray Scott fool you. There's another Ray Scott who is a bright, tough, supremely confident super salesman. And that's the Ray Scott who 14 years ago came up with the absolutely absurd idea of organizing bass fishermen into a national association. Now be honest with me, how many of you would have invested in such a ridiculous scheme as that? It's a pity you didn't. In January 1968, Scott sold his very first membership in what he appropriately named the Bass Anglers Sportsman Society. Today, 375,000 bass fishermen shell out $15 a year for the privilege of being a member of Bass. Multiply $15 times 375,000, then cry your heart out. And that's only part of the story. In conjunction with his organization, Scott publishes 3 very slick magazines with a combined circulation of more than 600,000. He also sells a lot of fishing boats. It could best be summed up with some bottom-line numbers. In 1981, the various Scott enterprises generated gross revenues of more than $16 million. Scott employs 120 people at the Bass headquarters on Bell Road. They have an annual payroll of $2.5 million. Ray Scott was born 49 years ago this month in Montgomery. That he was a young man in a hurry was evidenced early in his life. He was walking at the age of 9 months. At age 1, he posed for his first formal picture. And a couple of years later, he and his younger brother Eddie dressed up in look-alike white suits for Easter Sunday. Scott didn't exactly distinguish himself as a student at Capitol Heights, but as an athlete, he was something else. He was so talented in football, basketball, and track that in the 9th grade, he was awarded a scholarship to attend high school at the now-defunct Stark University School in Montgomery. He went to Howard College, now Samford University, on a football scholarship, but an off-season injury on a construction job ended his playing days. He dropped out of college and at the age of 19 went to work selling insurance. After a tour of duty in the Army, Scott entered Auburn, where he graduated in 1959. It was at Auburn that he met and married Eunice Hyatt. After college, it was back to selling insurance, and during the next few years, he sold a ton of it. His future in the insurance business appeared exceedingly bright. From early boyhood, Ray Scott had been a dedicated bass fisherman, and one day, appropriately while he was fishing, he came up with the idea of staging a series of tournaments featuring the best bass fishermen in the nation. It seemed ridiculous, but he was convinced it would work. Against the strong advice of family and friends, Scott quit the insurance business and went into partnership with the largemouth bass. The rest is history. Today, the Scott family, including sons Ray III and Steve and daughter Jennifer, live quite comfortably just off Bell Road, not far from the Bass headquarters. Be sure there's a well-stocked fish pond in the backyard. In his office, Scott has converted one wall into a giant aquarium, the permanent home of a couple of lunker-sized bass. He takes good care of them. He should. They've taken good care of him. Ray Scott, a very interesting person.
The head of the Alabama Atomic Vets Association is O.T. Weeks of Greenville, Alabama. In 1953, he took part in 11 atomic bomb tests in Nevada. He says on 2 occasions he conducted tests on Ground Zero after the bombs exploded. Weeks says it wasn't until the 60s that he realized medical problems he was having could have been related to his role in the testing of the A-bomb.
The birth defects that had come forth in my own children, and at that time many other children that I knew. So in the early 70s, when my condition worsened, I made myself a pledge that to either get in the fight or get out of it.
The group of vets and their widows who gathered in Montgomery are trying to see how they can get the government to compensate them for injuries. The government denies the vets' injuries and deaths are related to atomic testing. Weeks says, for years atomic vets have filed claims with the Veterans Administration with little or no results. Now the Alabama group is considering a class action suit.
We hope to get concerned lawyers that will help veterans with these cases, and by going into the federal courts, we hope to break the no-no that the government has given us and be able to obtain compensation for people that are in need.
Last year, the National Atomic Vets launched a manhunt for soldiers who were involved in the test. Weeks says the manhunt is still ongoing.
We have only about 150, and based on projected people that could have been exposed, that could be 2,000 or 3,000 veterans in the state of Alabama that were exposed.
Weeks hopes with legal action and coverage from the news media, atomic vets can get the rights he says have been denied by the government.
Exposed, and how far we've come.
Billy Beer, peanut farming, and arguing with the Justice Department about Libya. They all seem somewhat distant from what Billy Carter's doing these days. He's selling mobile homes.
I'm not sure whether I'm pleased by the way I became known. It was a kind of a joint effort. My image was made by both me and the press, and I guess it averaged. I had a choice either to kind of crawl in a hole and quit altogether or try to live my own life, which I tried to live my own life, and I think I did a fairly good job of it.
Now the brother of the former president is a spokesman for Tidwell Industries, a mobile home manufacturer based in Haleyville.
I think the best thing that happened to me personally by Jimmy being president, I got to meet people all over the country. I think if Jimmy had not have been elected president, I would still been in the peanut business, and I'd have been happy at it, which I was. But I'm more happy at the job I do now for Tidwell. I get to travel. I travel all over the country. I meet people everywhere, and I enjoy it. I look forward every day to going to work. Can't many people say that.
However, he says he doesn't get to see his brother much.
He travels a good bit, and I travel a whole lot, and we don't make a special point to see each other, but I do see him when we're both at home. As I've said a lot of times, he's my brother long before he was president. And I think when he was president, one of the main problems I had with everybody else was that I never would. I started to say never could, but I guess I could have. I never would divide the Jimmy Carter, the president, and Jimmy Carter, my brother. I still considered my brother at that time, and that was one of the reasons. One of the things a lot of people didn't like about it. I say time and again, I'm not a celebrity, I'm notorious, which is a fine distinction there, but I don't mind it. It's 90% of the time it's all right. Sometimes it gets a little aggravating, but most of the time it's fine.
And what question do people ask Billy Carter more than any other? How's Miss Lillian?
She's doing fine right now, and she'll be 84 years old tomorrow.
Reporting from Prattville, Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
just don't know a whole
On
heck of a
December
lot about it.
17, 1981, U.S. Brigadier General James Dozier answered the doorbell to his Verona, Italy apartment. Two men
that is
entered.
their
They were
mission,
part of a left-wing terrorist group. It was the start of his 42-day
there's a lot to be
nightmare.
said
General
for
Dozier became the
anonymity.
first American to be kidnapped by the Red Brigade
that's
Army.
not the case now.
He was taken to this apartment in northern Italy and confined to a tent.
I was chained by my right arm to one end of a bunk, by my left leg to the other end of the bunk.
Dozier was freed on January 28th in a dramatic, split-second police operation he calls a first-class job.
One of the policemen told me that it was 6 seconds from the time that he broke in the door until the time he knocked down the guy who was guarding me. And you can't quarrel with success.
The odds were against Jim Dozier. It was only the second time one of the Red Brigade's kidnapped victims had been rescued by police. Judith Dozier says she never gave up hope of seeing her husband alive again. Yet she had agreed from the start there would be no negotiating with the terrorists.
We'd had discussions about that in the house, so when the officials came to tell me there is no way we can negotiate, I was able to say Jim Dozier absolutely agrees with that, as I do.
You can't allow people like this to dictate national policy.
More than 200 terrorists have been rounded up as a result, and the liberation of General Dozier is said to be an outstanding success in the fight against terrorism. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.